This video will cover the simple sentences section of the T study manual. The information from this video can be found on page 192 of version 5 of the study manual. Before we talk about the different types of sentences that are explained on page 192, let's refresh ourselves on some basic sentence vocabulary. Every sentence has two parts, a subject and a predicate. The subject is the part of the sentence that tells you who or what the sentence is about. The subject performs the action of the verb. The subject is doing something and is always a noun or a pronoun. And as a reminder, a noun is a person, place, or thing. The predicate is the part of the sentence that tells us what the subject did or describes the subject. There's always a verb in the predicate. And as a reminder, a verb is a word that shows action or state of being. So here are some examples of subjects and predicates. If we take the sentence, the nurse took a blood sample, the subject is the nurse, and the predicate is where the verb starts, took a blood sample. How about the patient vomited on my shoes? The subject is the patient, and what the patient did, vomited on my shoes, is the predicate. We'll do one more. The newborn baby with all his fuzzy hair looked like a monkey. The subject is everything up to the verb. So the newborn baby with all his fuzzy hair. The predicate is what the newborn baby did. He looked like a monkey. Let's do a little more sentence vocabulary. A clause is any phrase that has a subject and a verb, but not necessarily a complete sentence. There are two types of clauses. One is an independent clause. This is a clause with a subject and a verb and a complete meaning. So this type of clause can stand by itself as a complete sentence. Then there's the dependent clause, and although it has a subject and a verb, it does not have a complete meaning and therefore is not a complete sentence. You can remember which is which because the dependent clause depends on another clause to be a complete sentence. We also call dependent clauses sentence fragments. Here are some examples of clauses to see if you can determine the difference between dependent and independent clauses. My cactus died. Well, this has a subject, cactus, and a verb, died. It's a complete meaning all by itself, so that is an independent clause. Because I gave it too much water. This clause has a subject, I, and it has a verb and a predicate, what did I do? Gave it too much water. But it's not a complete sentence all by itself. We need whatever goes with the because in this sentence, so this is an example of a dependent clause. When I was younger. Again, we have the subject I, and we have a verb, was younger, but this is not a complete sentence because of the word when. We need to know what happened when I was younger for this to have a complete meaning, so this is a dependent clause. I loved to play Red Rover. Subject is I. The predicate is what I liked to do. I loved to play Red Rover. And that is a complete meaning by itself, so it is an independent clause. I am always ready to learn something new. The subject is I. The predicate is am always ready to learn something new. That's a complete meaning, so that is an independent clause. Although I do not always like the way I am taught. The subject in this clause is I. The predicate is what we know about me. Do not always like the way I am taught. But this is not a complete meaning because of the word although. We need to know what goes with although. So this is a dependent clause. If we know what we were doing wrong. The subject is we. The predicate is know what we were doing wrong, but because of the word if, this is not a complete meaning, so this is a dependent clause. We would start doing it correctly. This sentence has a subject we, has a predicate would start doing it correctly and is a complete meaning, so it is an independent clause. Now that we know what clauses and independent and dependent clauses are, we can talk about different types of sentences. The first type of sentence you need to be able to identify for the T's is the simple sentence. This is a sentence that is only one independent clause. It only has one subject and one predicate. It is just one complete sentence. It has a complete meaning all by itself. Here are some examples. Sometimes simple sentences are very short. I am going, don't cry, never fear, I will return. These sentences all have one subject, one predicate, and a complete meaning. But sometimes simple sentences can be longer, like, I am going from this crowded cafeteria, don't cry over that exam from last week, never fear defeat while learning, or I will return to campus to help you study. You cannot assume that just because a sentence is short, it is simple, and just because it's long, it is not simple. The next type of sentence you need to be able to identify for the T's is the compound sentence. This is a sentence that is made up of two or more simple sentences. So that means there are two or more independent clauses. So there are at least two subjects and two predicates in this order. Subject, predicate, subject, predicate. There are two complete meanings because there are two different sentences. And the independent clauses are connected together either by a coordinating conjunction, a fanboy's word. If you don't know what fanboy's words are, go back to the Grammar for Style and Clarity section of the English grammar and sentence meaning, or in word meaning, part of the T's Prep Review. So independent clauses can be joined together to make a compound sentence by using a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon. Here are some examples. I enjoy watching golf on TV, but I would rather play golf with my friends. The coordinating conjunction there is but, so our sentence is subject I, predicate enjoy watching golf on TV, combined with the coordinating conjunction but, and then subject I, predicate would rather play golf with my friends. Here's another example. Don't cry over the exam. In the example, don't cry over the exam, I will help you study. The first part before the semicolon is don't cry over the exam, which is an independent clause. The second part is I will help you study, which is another independent clause. So together they form the compound sentence. The last type of sentences you need to be able to identify for the T's are complex sentences. A complex sentence contains one or more dependent clauses and an independent clause. The clauses are joined by a subordinating conjunction. If you do not know what subordinating conjunctions are, stop and go back to the Grammar for Style and Clarity section of this review. The dependent clause can be in several different places in the sentence. It can go at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. This is sometimes confusing for students because it's not that the dependent clause always comes first or that the independent clause always comes first. They can be placed in any order. Here are some examples of complex sentences. My cactus died because I gave it too much water. Because is a subordinating conjunction, and it is connected to the independent clause, I gave it too much water. That now makes it a dependent clause, which is following the independent clause, my cactus died. Together, that is a complex sentence. Here's another example. When I was younger, I loved to play Red Rover. The subordinating conjunction in this example is when, so the dependent clause is when I was younger, and the independent clause is I loved to play Red Rover. How about this example? I am always ready to learn something new, although I do not always like the way I am taught. The subordinating conjunction is although, so that makes, although I do not always like the way I am taught, the dependent clause, and I am always ready to learn something new is the independent clause. And here's your last example. If we know what we were doing wrong, we would start doing it correctly. The subordinating conjunction in this sentence is if. So if we knew what we were doing wrong is the dependent clause, and we would start doing it correctly is an independent clause. That concludes this video on simple sentences, complex sentences, and compound sentences.